Okay. How's the
Hey,
connection?
Glyn, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
A pretty good
Yes,
connection.
Go for it.
Well, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I've been wanting to do this for 40 years, so, it's a good time. Now is a good time. And I'm recording this on a mini disc recorder, so I apologize, but it's all I have that works. So...
I don't care what you're recording on. Go on, yeah.
I had such a nice little Tascam 4-track, but it won't take the microphone input, so there you go. So, Dave directed me to really talk about this record, which is fine with me, because it seems to me that, Eric Clapton's... You've had a tumultuous relationship with him over the years, based upon what I read in your book. So, but I assume that's all been patched up, and that was quite some time ago.
I think you've slightly misunderstood. It wasn't. I think from the right at the very beginning. I didn't think very much of him or where he was, but we overcame that when we started immediately prior to us working together, which was 40 years ago, and we've had a great relationship ever since. Really.
Now,
although when he became sober. I don't even know how long ago that was, but whenever that was, he did stop seeing me along with everyone else he used to hang out with as part of the program to get straight again.
I remember
which
reading
I completely understood.
So then, when did you connect up? When did you hook up?
We connected up because I wrote a book, and he read the book, and in the book I said how much I missed him as a pal. And he then rang me and said, "Well, I am still your friend. Don't be ridiculous," sort of thing. So
you had a few relationships.
And then the next thing was he asked me to make an album with him again. So
you had a few. There were a few relationships in the book where that happened, where you kind of cut it off and then restored it, which is great, I think. So
right.
Now this album. He came to you to produce and engineer an album. How long ago did this happen?
It was probably about this time last year.
And did that surprise you at all?
He'd already slotted in a time. He'd booked the studio. It was in the end for October and November in the spring of last year. I mean, that's how far That's how far ahead he was planning. So it was quite a long wait from when he asked me to do it to actually get on with it and do it.
Right. And was it originally planned to be done in the old school recording methodology, or is that something that you brought to the project? To record it to tape, and mix to tape.
It was certainly it was my suggestion to do it that way, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons why he asked me to make the record with him, because that's the way I work. I'm not at all interested in working in the digital domain. Right. Initially.
But
I always record analog. Obviously, on very rare occasions, one has to use Pro Tools because perhaps pre-recorded material comes to you in that format. But if I'm given the option, then it's analog.
Well, I'm all for that. Now, so what? Just before we continue, what is it about tape? All these naysayers say, "Oh, it's got scrape flutter. It's got all these distortion and noise." But it sounds much better to me. So what is it about tape, do you think, that makes that happen?
Well, you just said it. It sounds much better. I don't know. I'm sure different people have different ideas about why it sounds better. To me, digital is too clinical.
Right.
There's something that is captured on tape which is far warmer and far more realistic in many ways.
Yeah, I like the realistic word better than warmer, because if you record something that really sounds icy cold to tape, it should sound icy cold. It shouldn't sound warm. So.
Well, that's your opinion. Okay. Right.
If it's supposed to sound icy cold, I would hope that that's how it would come out. But anyway, so you went into the studio prepared to record to tape, and is it more fun recording on tape and knowing that, if there are problems and the editing is more difficult, but is it still more fun because it's a challenge, or is it just that's what you're used to?
Well, I don't think editing is more difficult at all.
Mm-hmm. Well,
quite the reverse. I don't think I can edit a piece of tape just probably more quickly or as quickly as anybody can do an edit on Pro Tools. I mean, the only difference in Pro Tools is you can copy and paste stuff, which is not quite so simple to do with analog, because as you know, you lose a generation when you do that. Although most people wouldn't notice that that generation being gone.
I agree.
And equally, you can edit within a track rather than the entire thing, which of course you can't do on tape. So I suppose there's an advantage there. But I don't have a problem with editing. To me, I've been making records since 1959. When I started, we did everything mono.
Right.
So that's how I was trained, and the rules that I learnt then still apply as far as I'm concerned. And I think that it's perfectly acceptable.
I do too. You don't want to get an argument from me.
I don't have a problem with the process at all.
Right. I think it's some of the younger guys who see it. Well, some of them are getting back to it, but a lot of them see it can be more cumbersome, and and the tape, getting good tape has been difficult. How did you find that?
Well, that's entirely different from what we've just been talking about. Yes, obviously, getting good vinyl is difficult. Go to the end process.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, getting good vinyl always was difficult. It's just that much more difficult now because there isn't so much of it about.
Well, it's actually getting better now. It's getting
good pressing is always difficult.
It's getting better now. They're applying a lot of modern techniques to pressing records, and so I'm getting great records right now, and I get sent a lot of records, and I think it's almost better than ever now from the good pressing plants. So, but before we get to the vinyl thing, I just want to get back into the studio. You said in your book, and I think it makes it's something a lot of people don't realize, that the board, the mixing board, or the desk as you call it over there, is so important to the final result. So, in this studio that was booked, what did they have in there for a mixing board?
The console is a Neve, one of the more recent Neves, not an old one, which actually I don't particularly like the sound of at all. So I used almost entirely outboard mic amps. I've got old Neve mic amps. It was a mixture of API and Neve, and they had in the same control room they had a couple of other very old desks, one from Abbey Road, and so on odd occasion I'd use a channel from one of those consoles, and I just used the Neve in the room for monitoring, really.
Oh, that's interesting. So you brought your own board essentially in parts.
Hello?
And then you recorded this. Yeah, I'm here. Are you there?
Hello?
I'm here. I hear you.
Hello?
I hear you. I'm hearing you, and you're not hearing me.
Hello?
I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Ugh. I could hear
modern technology.
Yes.
Carry on. Yeah.
I could hear you talking that whole time, but you.
Really? Well, I couldn't hear a thing from you.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, here we are back. So, I really enjoyed that in your book. You gave credit to the gentleman who designed the board at Olympic, and then he ended up starting Helios. I like when people get credit for doing things that make a difference in all of this. So, you recorded to 16 tracks. And it was basically a live, everybody played live?
15 IPS, 16 track with Dolby.
With Dolby, interesting.
Yeah.
And then you mixed it to 1/4 inch.
Yep.
And it was very straight. It was
15 IPS.
Very straightforward.
Yeah. Very straightforward. Doesn't get any more straightforward.
And that was most of the same band that played with him at the Royal Albert Hall, which was a fantastic concert too. So.
Yes,
and
precisely right. And we brought 2 musicians in for a week of the recording from America.
And who were they?
Walt Richmond, a keyboard player from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who played with J.J. Cale originally, and Dirk Powell, who's an accordion player. In fact, he's a multi-instrumentalist, but we brought him more for accordion than anything.
No, I know.
He's from Louisiana.
I noticed in your book you really tended to pay tribute to keyboard players. You made a special effort, it seems to me, to do that. Is that something that you think is really...
No, I didn't make a special
You didn't?
episode.
It came across that way.
Oh, it's fine that it came across that way, but absolutely not, no. No, I mean, that's interesting. Okay.
You never can tell how people react. You know, you write something, believe me, I know that all the time, and then people read into things that you had no intention of writing, but that's what happens.
Well, I mean, I certainly had every syllable that's in that book, I had an intention of writing.
Oh, I'm sure. You know, when I read the book...
I didn't deliberately set out to pay tribute to keyboard players specifically,
Yes.
although I've had good relationships with a few, but then I have with every instrument that I've come across recording, I suppose.
Well, that's just how it seemed to me.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so then you took the finished tape, and you actually came to... you went up to Maine to Bob Ludwig's, another one of my heroes forever.
Completely brilliant man.
Oh yeah, one of my faves. I've been talking with him for decades, and it's just, I'm sorry that he got rid of his cutting lathe, but he did. So now he mastered. This is what I'm confused about. He mastered it for the digital version, and then you took the tape to Bernie's, another one of my heroes. I spent a lot of time out there with Bernie, cutting the lacquers.
Yes.
And
why is that confusing?
Well, you know, because I'll tell you why it's confusing, because in the world we live in today, when a mastering credit says mastered by Bob Ludwig and vinyl cutting by Bernie Grundman, that usually means that Bob has transferred the analog tape to 9624 and the files are used to cut the record. So
precisely. And that's because people, record companies in particular, are so unbelievably ignorant about the quality of sound.
I agree with you 100%.
What on earth is the point of recording something on analog tape and then having it converted to digital for the vinyl? I mean, that's just absurd.
I agree. It's better than nothing. I mean, you know, we've been grasping for whatever we can get.
I don't. Well, okay. It sort of defeats the object, really.
I cannot disagree with you, but it's better than nothing. You know, at least it was put down to tape, so some of the qualities will come through. But I agree, it's ridiculous once you've got a master tape to not use it to cut lacquers. And there's plenty of places that can do it with a preview head and do great work. So I will have to make sure people understand that, because at this point in time, when people see that kind of credit, and Bob has a relationship with people like Wilco, with Jeff Tweedy, where he records analog and then they cut from 9624 files. So I'll make sure people know this was all done analog.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, to be fair to Bob, that if it's Bob that's doing the digital conversion, it won't get any better than that off the tape, that's for sure.
Right, yep.
In the digital domain. But the reality is, you know, Bernie took my tape and literally it went through a volume pot. It didn't go through anything.
Right.
It went straight from the tape machine to the bloody lathe.
Yep. No, I've been there for those kinds of masterings. Yeah, I've been there for those kinds of masterings, and I've got test lacquers.
And that awesome. To me is, years ago when I used to master with Doug Sachs for many years.
Another great.
He mastered almost every record I ever made forever.
I know.
We did go through his console, but his console was the simplest little device. It literally was a volume pot, really.
Yeah, it's
and obviously you had EQ if you wanted it, but nearly everything we did together, he cut flat.
And you know, his whole mastering chain and everything was purchased by someone, and it's being moved to Kansas and being reset up as it existed in Ojai, and it'll be continued to be used, which is really good news.
Good Lord.
Yeah, he was a great guy.
That's interesting.
I love that guy.
Great.
Yeah, my friend Chad Kassem did it. He owns a pressing plant. He owns a recording studio. This is the guy that started selling records out of milk crates 30 years ago.
Right.
That's how he did it. But at any rate, so this record was done as purely as can be, and you listened to test pressings. Did you do that?
I haven't got them yet.
Yeah.
In fact, it'll be Bob that will listen to them probably, which I'd be quite, because that'll expedite the process depending on how close they are to the date of release.
Right.
But I'll certainly check test pressing. Yes.
Yeah.
But initially, I would imagine I've asked for them to be sent to Bob.
Right. In fact, I'm trying to help him get a new turntable for his test pressing business, because so much of it is happening now. He doesn't have a good turntable in his. He has one at home that's good. He doesn't have a good one in his.
Well, I don't care where he checks it. I know if he checks it, it'll be okay with me. Right. It's all I know.
So let's just change the subject for 1 second. So what is your feeling about this vinyl revival? Does it make sense to you? Do you like it, or you think it's a fad? or you don't care, or
Well, of course I care. I mourn the passing of vinyl, along with anyone else who's been around recording music as long as I have, and the fact that there's any kind of resurgence in the vinyl market is quite wonderful. I guess it is a fad to a certain degree. I read the other day that a huge number of people who buy vinyl albums don't even have a turntable to play them.
Well, I think that's an anecdote. I don't believe it, because I'm in the thick of this, because I am there, and I talk to these young people. I have 8-year-old fans who are buying records and turntables, and I was on an airplane with a 15-year-old girl and with her mother, and I told them what I did, and the daughter said, all my friends have turntables, and I'm going to get one when I get home. And the mother said, well, I play CDs, and the daughter said, Mom, you're so old-fashioned.
Yes, exactly. I think quite. I'm stating the obvious here, but the method of playing back music is so ingrained for the last 20 years, or however long it is, probably longer than that, in the format of MP3s and little piddly little earphones.
Yep.
I don't think with 99% of people who listen to music now, I don't think they are nearly as discerning as we were, and that's perfectly all right, I guess. It has to be. I'm sure a lot of movie makers burst into tears when they see one of their films on a little screen on an aeroplane,
sure.
Completely crucified. So that's the way of our modern living.
Yeah.
Equally, the process in our day, back in the 60s, we'd wait for an album to come out by an artist that we absolutely couldn't wait to get the next record. We'd go and get it with great eagerness, take it home, sit in the middle of 2 speakers and listen to the entire album. It was like watching a movie. That was the process. And the album, certainly when I started from whenever it was, when I had any kind of say in the very early 60s, I suppose, that process to me was very, very, very important, and each album that I was involved with making was a statement of where that artist was at, if it was somebody who was writing the material, and it was put together with great care and affection to be played as an entire thing. And nowadays, albums aren't made that way, and equally they're not listened to that way.
Yeah, well, some are. So, I think it's coming back. I talk to young people all the time, and a friend of mine, Colleen Murphy in the UK, runs these classic album Sundays events at a bar, and everybody has to come in and put their cell phones down.
Okay. I'm generalising.
Yes, of course.
I'm not. Of course, there are people who are still interested, but equally, the major percentage of people who of all ages now, never mind about kids, they don't listen to music in the same way, and that's just the way it is. So if a few can be won over, the more the merrier.
Exactly. I'm so optimistic right now. After years of horrors, it is definitely getting in the right direction again here. Just like this record will prove. So this will be a double 45 cut from the master tape. It won't get much better than that. It even sounded good over my computer speaker, so I imagine it's going to be unbelievable when I hear it at home. And the playing sounds really, really vital. So, and you had a great time doing it. So, are you interested?
We had a fantastic time doing it. Absolutely, yeah.
And are you working on anything new right now? Anything else going on?
No, I'm taking some time off.
Were you at Brian Ahern's studio when they had the record launch party for White Mansions? Were you at that event? Just curious.
I don't recall a party. I recorded the album at Brian Ahern's studio, so I probably threw the party.
Because there was one there, and I was there, but I didn't know who you were. If you were there, sorry I didn't meet you. Now I wanted to.
Well, there you go.
Was Ogden's Nut Gun Flake recorded on? Was that recorded on a 4-track recorder? Do you recall? I mean, I'm bringing back all this.
No, it wasn't recorded on a 4-track recorder. That would have probably been 8-track by then, I would think.
The bass on that record is insane. I don't know how you did that record. The sound is spectacular.
The same as any other record I've ever made. No, unusual. No. Well, hold on a second. Constantly, since you've been talking to me, you seem to be disagreeing with what I'm saying.
No, I agree with everything you say.
On face value. If you're interviewing me, you could at least do me the courtesy of accepting what I'm saying. Okay. And what I'm telling you is there were no tricks, and that's what I mean. Okay? Right, carry on.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about recording the Joan Armatrading's third album. You used a PZM microphone on that, as I recall. You didn't? I thought I read someplace that was the first use of a PZM microphone in a recording studio.
No, I don't recall that.
So I don't know whether you looked at the list of records that I played for my radio show. That was my tribute to you, but I put that show together before I read your book, and it's, you know, we have the same taste in your records, which ones you really, really liked, which was a good thing.
Oh, that's good.
And so, are you going to be doing any kind of follow-up with this record and promoting it, or is your job done now with this?
My job is done. I'll certainly help in the promotion, which is why I'm talking to you. Other than that, I'm finished. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it's gonna be a very successful. Is he seeing this as like a career capper? Do you know? Is there some particular reason why he decided to make this record at this time and do it himself that he expressed to you, or not?
No, he didn't. No, as far as I'm concerned, it was just time in his eyes for him to make another record. It was as simple as that, really. I don't think it's supposed to have any special meaning one way or the other. But it's he very much chose and picked the material himself. I had absolutely no input to that at all. And that kind of gives you a bit of a clue, I suppose. It's such an eclectic mix of songs, which I wasn't convinced would work tremendously well, but I get it now, and that was his vision, not mine completely.
Yeah, I mean, he threw a Dylan song in there, and then he ends it with an old classic. I'll be singing it, which I haven't had a chance to listen to yet. But
yeah.
And that makes a statement in and of itself to end with "I'll be seeing it."
Yes, exactly.
So, as an engineer turned producer, it seems to me that you always, in some ways, were producing, even if you're just the engineer. You are producing. I mean, I was friends with Bill Porter, who did all the Roy Orbison and Elvis recordings, and he was really the producer on those, even when Fred Foster got producer credits, because Bill was creating the sound of the record. He wasn't picking the musicians necessarily, but wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, well, creating the sound is only a part, a fairly important part, of course, of what a producer. What a producer is responsible for. So, if the fact is, if the producer chose the engineer you just mentioned, that was part of his role. So and he contributed marvelous sound to the record. That was obviously picking the musicians, the songs, having the confidence of the artist to guide him through his performances. Invariably, perhaps having a hand in the arrangements and all the rest of it, wouldn't necessarily have had anything to do with the engineer. He'd have just been responsible for the sound. And equally, during my years as an engineer, I was fortunate enough to work with a huge number of some really wonderful producers and some absolutely useless ones. I guess you could say that about any profession.
Yes.
And that was a great learning process to me. And clearly there were some producers that I worked with where we did, the reality was that we did co-produce. But it never bothered me that I didn't get credit at all, and it still doesn't to this day. Because I was lucky to be in the room to begin with, as far as I was concerned, and as I say, I learned a tremendous amount.
So when you started getting the producer credit, it wasn't like a sea change. It was kind of just sort of like you were just a slight shift, right?
Well, here's the deal. Up until the first production that I got credit for, which was the first Steve Miller album. There were engineers did not become producers. That was not in the book at all. For some reason, didn't ask me why, but it did not happen. So I'm sure there were several, possibly before me, but even at the same time. But I'm not aware of them. And the only reason it happened to me was because Steve Miller tried to produce this album himself, and after a month in the studio, had got nothing. And I suggested to him that he needed to.
I'm losing you again.
I'm bored, Richard. There's nothing getting done here.
Right.
And he said, "Well, would I produce it?" So I jumped in, and boy, was I ready!
Yeah. And what did that consist of?
All those years with the Rolling Stones, for example, I guarantee you, they don't think of me as a producer today because it's ingrained in them. I'm an engineer. That's the way it is. It's really weird.
But that allowed you to sort of produce them without them knowing it, or?
Well, they had perfectly competent people producing them. In fact, Mick and Keith are completely competent producers in their own right. Whoever was in the chair as the producer provided. Listen, we could go on for hours about this. There are so many different types of producers as to what they bring to a project. Some of them are far more musical than others. Some of them have a much bigger ego than others, and the artist is virtually not important. They use the artist as a tool to promote themselves.
Right.
Phil Spector being the classic example.
Yep.
And everything in between. And there are some guys who provide a really wonderful creative atmosphere in which to set the artist free to do their thing.
So when you sat down with Steve Miller, and he was producing, nothing was coming out. What did you do? You just looked at the songs and tried to focus him and get.
Well, I mean, basically, instead of behaving as an engineer would, which is doing as you're told, basically, and recording whatever's going on,
yep.
You don't have any input as to what time people turn up, or when somebody wants to do 94 takes or something. You just have to sit there and do it.
Right.
As a producer, you take control, you take the reins, and you go, okay, we'll do this song. I think it's too fast. I think it's possibly too long. I think that chorus could be removed, or the intro's too long, or whatever it is. And you set them going, and you aim them you have a vision of what the end product of that song could be, and you work everybody until you achieve it. And
with artists, that can be difficult sometimes, I'm sure, because they're easily bruised and they're.
Well, yeah, of course it can. Equally, nearly everybody I've ever worked with, I've been so incredibly fortunate. They're all different. Everybody has slightly different requirements. Some people require help, and other people, it's best if you shut up and stay out the bloody way. Otherwise, you'll bugger it up.
Right. So, are you partly like a hand holder and a psychologist, and partly a technician? I mean, is it all of those things involved in that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's a skill that you
confidence booster. Having any. I think it's incredibly difficult for any creative person to judge their own work.
Yeah.
Would you not agree with that? I mean, same with a painter. An artist. They'll strive to achieve something for several weeks, and they won't show it to anybody, and they're worried about showing it to anybody because they think it's awful, and in fact it's probably amazing. And the same thing can happen with somebody who's written a song. I mean, if somebody sits down and plays you a song and you react really positively, which has happened to me 9,000 times, obviously the artist immediately feels better about what they've just done, because somebody whose opinion they evidently respect has responded in a positive way to it, which gives them a little more confidence. It's not rocket science.
Now, on this record, it was a whole different process from the earlier days of just recording and producing, because these are all mature, experienced people, yourself included. So it was more straightforward, I assume.
You hit it right on the head. This album is quite an exception, based on the fact that Eric had a very, very clear idea about what he wanted to achieve, and most of the ideas that I brought to the project, he politely rejected.
Oh.
And which is, I'm talking about when you're actually in the studio, possibly increasing the tempo of something, for example.
Right.
I felt a couple of things he was doing were a bit too slow, and he insisted on doing it the tempo he wanted, and actually, those sort of ideas are they're not that. It isn't critical. It's not that important. It's a matter of opinion, as to whether something should be faster or not.
Sure.
And he was the bugger playing it and singing it, so he needed to have it at the tempo he wanted. So none of that ever bothered me. Excuse me. Equally, I might want to change an arrangement slightly because I felt the song was too long, and again, he had a very clear idea about what he wanted. He wasn't interested in that input from me on this record at all. When I made Slow Hand with him, it was completely different. But
Different
he's
time.
matured. He's a different guy, and this record is very, very much Eric Clapton. You know, I mean, and more power to him. I think it's astonishing. His playing and singing on this record is absolutely jaw-dropping, I think. I mean, his taste is just impeccable.
Well, yeah, I think he's always had.
And my role, very quickly, I realised, was to sit there and shut up and record it.
Yeah.
Just record it, and obviously be supportive to the other musicians, because obviously there's quite a lot goes on when you're cutting a track live with 7 or 8 people, and so you can help there.
But there is nothing like a live recording. There's nothing when musicians are communicating live. There's just nothing like
absolutely.
that.
If you read my book, you know my book.
I did read your book. I wanted to talk about your book for 1 second. So, what amazed me about your book, first of all, to read a book by a producer and engineer that's laugh out loud funny. That doesn't happen that often, but I laughed many times reading your book.
Oh, well, that's great that you found it amusing.
Oh, you have very cutting humor that I really love. Like when you talked about one guy thought you were a bad smell. I mean, that was very funny. I was on an airplane reading that. I laughed out loud. I have more dog ears in this book, but I didn't have a chance to really, formulate questions based upon the book because this all happened really quickly. But what I thought was really interesting about the book is it felt like you were wearing 2 roles. You had 2 roles to play in the book. You produced the book and you produced the artist. You being the artist because you wrote it, but it was so carefully. It was a book that felt more produced than a lot of books. A lot of these kinds of books that can be memoirs, they end up being gossipy or very self-serving, and it's very difficult to get beyond that and measure it out. And this book is so well measured out in that sense because it's neither gossipy nor self-serving.
I really appreciate your compliments. That's very, very kind of you to say that. When I set out to write the book, one of the major principles that I set myself was not to say anything salacious about anybody. And there's obviously, I could write several books of salacious
right.
to people.
I mean, you were judgmental, which is fine. You were.
That's slightly different there.
Yes, honestly judgmental, and you were very self-critical too, which I thought was also very refreshing.
But then, see, I think that's a healthy thing. Let me just clarify something from earlier on. You laughed when I said that there were no tricks in the recording of the bass on the small bass.
Yeah.
My whole approach to recording is about as simple and basic as it gets. My sort of principles are quite simply to record the sound of the musician that's giving me not to recreate anything different, basically, but to try and replicate the sound the guy is getting in the first place, and that can be quite difficult to do.
Yes.
But equally, it does not involve anything particularly clever. And over the years, one picks up little things from trial and error, or from mistakes, invariably in my case. But they're really. It's no more than common sense, my approach to recording. It's absolutely no more than that. And obviously I have some sort of talent to be able to mix stuff in a perspective that's interesting.
Yes, because I didn't know your name, and I heard, when I was younger and you started making records, I would buy these records and go and just, it was like, who, what? And continually that would be the case until I started associating a name with what I was hearing. And it's not as if you had
my point to you is it is not massive technical influence at all. In fact, it's quite the reverse. The less you have in the chain between the microphone and the tape, almost certainly the more, from my perspective, from what I'm trying to do, the better. So I would always go out in the studio and listen to what the guy's giving me before I make any judgment. If it's sounding like shite in the control room, most engineers immediately grab for the nearest limiter or equalizer or whatever else and try and recreate whatever it is. But if they go out in the room and actually listen to what the guy's giving, almost 100% of the time, it'll either be much better than you're hearing it in the control room, or alternatively, what the guy's giving you isn't isn't right for what the rest of the picture, the sound picture that you're creating in the control room, and it's much more effective to change it in the room, possibly on the amp or the way the guy's playing or whatever it is. So I'm sorry, I'm giving you a bloody lecture.
No, I'm happy. Listen, I'm happy.
I didn't mean to do that. But
no, it's perfectly. I'm happy to hear all of that. But and yet still, you cannot say that all of your records sound the same. I mean, there's such a wide variety.
No, they don't sound the same because I'm using different musicians.
Well, beyond that,
and the material and the songwriting requires a different approach. It's just like you get up in the morning, it's pouring with rain, and it's freezing cold. You dress accordingly, or if the sun's shining, you dress differently. It's the same thing.
Yeah, because a rough mix. I mean, that's everything about that record is perfect in my world. Just
it's the most remarkable. But look at the people playing on it. I mean, it's
But the way it was recorded too, so intimate, and yet not in your face. Just and people. That's a record that escapes a lot of people. They've never heard of it. It's one of the records
I couldn't agree more, and it might be my favorite album I ever did, actually.
Yeah, I could understand that. It's one of my favorites to listen to. At any rate, one more question. Beggar's Banquet apparently came out at the wrong speed. Are you familiar with that?
No. Never. Don't have a copy of it. No idea what speed it was. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, the word is somehow the original British pressing. The playback deck was at the wrong speed when they cut it, and they corrected it when they reissued it recently. I don't know. I thought maybe you knew something about that.
Sounds like a load of nonsense to me. I wouldn't know. I don't own any Rolling Stone records. I'd heard quite enough of any Rolling Stone record I made by the time I'd finished making it.
But you still listen.
I don't play them out of choice.
You still listen to music and enjoy music, right?
Good Lord, yes, of course I do.
Because I interviewed Keith Emerson, and he told me he didn't listen when he was, obviously it was a couple of years ago, he didn't listen to music, he watched the History Channel, and that's as far as he went. That was very disappointing,
Oh, well, he wasn't a particularly nice person in my view, so that doesn't surprise me in the least.
Well, I noticed...
I don't know, there's a record you should check out, by the way, if you're an audiophile, which apparently you are. And it's a record I made with Ben Tench. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called You Should Be So Lucky.
I saw the tape at Bernie's, and it's a record I haven't gotten, but I will get it now.
Well, you should do, because there's some fantastic musicianship on it. And I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Tench, but
of course, yeah.
He's the keyboard player in the Heartbreakers. Yeah. And I wanted to make, he's a mate of mine, he's played on lots of records for me.
Sure.
And I just, because he was my dear friend, I said, we should make an album, we'd have such a good time. And thinking we'd make an instrumental record. And it turned out that he was a songwriter, which I had no idea. I don't like all the songs on the album, but there's 3 or 4 that are just fantastic.
And I'm sure the whole thing sounds great, so that'll get me through the songs.
Well, it does sound great, but that's again because there's some fantastic musicians in it. Check it out. I know you'll love it.
I will.
And it too was mastered by Bernie and by Bob Ludwig. Same process.
Now, there's some, talking about keyboardists, I was really surprised and gratified to see in the book that you were a fan of Bill Payne and Little Feat. And I saw Bill Payne, speaking of keyboardists that you don't consider songwriters, I saw Bill Payne about 3 weeks ago play at a 120-seat theater out in the boondocks of New Jersey, and it was supposed to be an evening of Little Feat, reminiscent. He was going to talk, so I didn't know what it was going to be, but I thought
I thought it was fantastic.
Listen, first of all, he's a fantastic singer, and he's written he's written songs with the poetry editor of the New Yorker, and it was like as good as the band would be. By himself, he made it sound like that, and I said to myself, "You should get a hold of this guy and make an album with me." It was
what a brilliant idea! Apart from anything else, I'm really fond of him. He's the nicest man you'll ever meet.
Oh yes, I finally did.
And just jaw-dropping musician, just extraordinary musician.
And it was an amazing evening. I didn't know what to expect by himself, because sometimes people.
I'd prefer to see him on his own. That would be great because it would be far more intimate.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. I'm going to look. I've got his number somewhere. I wonder if he's still at the same number.
I hope that
I'll
happens.
find him.
I really hope that
Yeah,
happens.
cool, man. Well, it's really nice talking to you.
It really was. I appreciate the
you
amount
well
of
with your
time you
program.
gave me, and it was a wonderful conversation. And I'm just such a big fan of your work, and you're one of my heroes. So I appreciate the conversation so much.
Well, my pleasure entirely. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.